Well, hello everyone, and welcome to this webinar. So this is just continuation of our weekly webinars that we do here at Integrated Health Systems and Integrated Brain Centers. And tonight I'm going to be discussing hypoglycemia in children. So the goal of this seminar is to really kind of get into some of the blood sugar aspects, how it impacts our children, things that we can do to support our children, and things to look out for. So we're going to talk more about that for the next, about 30, 40 minutes and see how it goes. Hope everybody enjoys this. So a little bit about me. So if you've watched other webinars or podcasts, and you definitely know about me and my staff. So I'm the owner of Integrated Health Systems and Integrated Brain Centers here in Denver, Colorado, and we specialize in combining the aspects of functional medicine and functional neurology together. It's a lot of fun. It really helps, I think, get patients, to these places of getting better, quicker. I think we look at identifying all aspects of their health so that we're not hyper focused on just one piece and maybe missing another. So we really try hard to help our patients get well as fast as we can, and we really dig deep in trying to figure out the answers and the causes. So I'm a board certified chiropractic neurologist and a chiropractic nutritionist. I'm also a certified nutrition specialist. Been in practice now for 17 years. So we see a lot of difficult cases, people that are looking for a place where they can work with a doc that is willing to invest and investigate what's going on with them. So that's a little bit about me. So let's talk about blood sugar. So that's kind of our goal for this evening, and we really want to talk about what are we looking for? What are the pieces about blood sugar that we can identify with our kids? And honestly, as we're going through this webinar, a lot of this can apply to adults. So we'll kind of talk about the different symptoms. We're going to talk about some blood work. We're going to talk about patterns, and then I'll talk about what we can do to support our kids and even each other. So even though this is titled, the signs of hypoglycemia in children, really take away that this can also apply towards adults, and this might be something that you're also struggling with. So when we're saying, what do we look for? I want to talk about some of the low blood sugar symptoms. These are, I would say, common, but it's funny how a lot of people don't find these to be common, because the problem with some of these symptoms too is they can be associated with a lot of other aspects of physiology that are abnormal. So for instance, hypothyroidism, anemia, hormonal imbalances, brain function, brain dysfunction, neurodegeneration. There's a lot of things that are attached to these symptoms. So with low blood sugar, we're going to look for specifically these pieces. So we're going to look for fatigue. And a lot of times when we talk about fatigue, and when I go through this webinar, I have a few slides, but I'm probably going to talk a lot about, the information around these slides. So kind of bear with me. I'm not going to be flipping through a lot of slides this evening. But fatigue, you'll tend to see fatigue that's before meals. So people that wake up tired, they're tired right before lunch, they're tired right before dinner. This aspect of fatigue kind of lets us know that people have low blood sugar. Oftentimes, whenever I'm lecturing, you can kind of tell the people in the audience that have low blood sugar because they start fading away, they start nodding off, they start kind of losing their attention, their focus. And so you can kind of tell when it's about time to break for lunch because there's a big group of people in the audience that you're starting to lose touch of, or lose touch with. Now with fatigue, again, fatigue we'll see before meals. Unable to sleep, and I'll go back to fatigue really fast with meals. Some people can have fatigue all day, depending on if their blood sugar is low all day. And then there are people that feel better after they eat. So if you're one of those people that feels better after you eat, and as we talk about kids, they might do better after lunch. So if you notice that your kid is doing better with the afternoon classes and not so well with the morning classes, this could be indicative of a blood sugar issue. Now, sleep is another piece that I think often gets overlooked when it comes to blood sugar, but you have to have proper blood sugar while you're sleeping. And if you have these dips in blood sugar or you have these spikes in blood sugar, they can be very disruptive to sleep. So what we find is that people that have low blood sugar tend to complain that they have a hard time staying asleep. Okay. And so your adrenals also come into play throughout the evening to try to keep you, going throughout your sleep without any interruptions. But if your blood sugar tends to be on the low side and your adrenal system is on that low side, this is what we tend to see with people that wake up at between 2 and 3 in the morning, or 1 to 3. It's usually that early morning time where they wake up and then they can struggle going back to sleep. Sometimes patients will talk about, how they wake up several times throughout the night, and unfortunately, they also will talk about how their mind races. Now, the reason why you see this, and again, you can see this in kids where they're getting up throughout the night and maybe they're interrupting you, and you're trying to sleep, and they're, like, Mom, I can't sleep. Mom, I woke up again. Mom, I had a bad dream. Mom, I can't go back to sleep. So these could be signs of some blood sugar instabilities. Headache with exertion. So you might see this with, say, the sports. You have a kid that plays sports and they get headaches after sports. They get headaches after they're running. They might get headaches after PE class. But headaches with exertion usually tend to be related to blood sugar because you can run out of fuel. And when your blood sugar dips and your fuel dips, then you tend to see a lot of blood sugar related headaches. And as kind of a matter of fact, a lot of headaches, you actually want to look at blood sugar imbalances. People that wake up with headaches, people that have mid morning headaches, mid afternoon headaches, these are all signs that you can have a blood sugar imbalance. Um, Fatigue between meals. So again, you start seeing with low blood sugar more of these in between meals, that you tend to see the dip. So around like 2, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, mid morning, and even when you wake up. I like to laugh and tell patients that, there's definitely certain companies, certain coffee chains that really understand that people can have blood sugar issues mid afternoon. If you look at some of the sugary drinks that are offered in the afternoon, just look at the commercials that are out there, and a lot of the candy bars and high sugar, foods are often advertised in those mid afternoon slots. It makes sense that the companies know that we all have low blood sugar in the afternoon, but a lot of us don't. And so, unfortunately, and I think with kids, and this is why I want to talk about kids more, is that sometimes kids are accused of not focusing or having ADD or being spacey or not paying attention, when in fact they're just struggling with their blood sugar. In the workplace, you would see an adult that would struggle, and they would say to themselves, I must be hungry. I should go get something. And they get up and they go to the break room and they grab a snack, or they have a snack with them in their bag, or they bring an orange, or what have you. But when it comes to kids, we don't think that way. We think, oh, well, just sit down. You need to stay focused. You need to pay attention. And oftentimes when I'm working with kids and teachers, I'm like, hey, this could be something we need to look at, because if they're having a hard time staying focused, maybe it's not their fault. Maybe it's their blood sugar is too low. And especially, if they fatigue before meals, during, between meals, and they feel better after lunch, that could be an early sign that we need to look into this. Sometimes if you look at blood sugar and food and diet, we often see that kids will sometimes eat really, really early because they have to catch the bus and school starts early. Now, depending on when their lunch break is, some kids, have lunch at 11, some kids have lunch at 12 or 12:30, but what time do they eat breakfast, and do they get a snack, or did they eat breakfast? There's some kids that don't even eat breakfast. So we'll kind of talk, and I really want you all to think, if you're a practitioner listening to this webinar, if you're a teacher listening to this webinar, or a parent, the goal is to try to figure out what's going on and how are they eating, what are they eating, what time they're eating, and when their symptoms come on. And this starts to give us clues to whether it is a blood sugar issue or if it's some other issue that could be impacting how they function throughout the day, and how they function in school. Last but not least, you'll see things like lightheadedness, blurred vision, anxiety, shaky, nervous, restlessness. They might be, shaking their leg at a desk and kind of shaking the whole desk. They might be, tapping a pin, clicking a pin, just very fidgety. So these are things that you want to look for, if you're a teacher or parent, how's my kid behaving in class and why are they behaving that way in class? Sometimes it's not always simply just here, give them their medication and everything's going to be great. If we can identify why the kid is like this, I think in the long run, it's better for the individual and for the whole family unit and classroom setting. Now, I wanted to throw another piece in here. So I'm going to talk about lab testing. So it's really simple to talk about blood sugar, and really we can talk about blood sugar all day long. I think the big takeaways and things that you're looking for is, do they feel better? Do you feel better after you eat? Do you fatigue between meals? Do you get headaches with exertion, or do you wake up with a headache? And then finally, do you have a hard time staying asleep? Those are kind of your classic symptoms of low blood sugar. Now, just to kind of contrast that before I go into lab setting or lab testing, is that you can have things like insulin resistance too, where a kid is doing really well, and then they eat something for lunch that's not very healthy. And unfortunately, you kind of see a lot of lunches out there are not very healthy. There's a lot of like candies and cookies and sugary things and soda pops and fruit boxes. And sometimes kids can have sugar, and then what they do is they crash afterwards. So if your kid is having a hard time after lunch and they just can't focus for the rest of the afternoon, that's when you want to start looking back and say, what did you have for lunch? And you can have these kind of insulin resistance syndromes in kids that we don't really think about. Again, we think about it in adults, right? So we go out to a meeting and you see people eat a hamburger, French fries, and a soda. And then they go back to work and they're like, oh, I'm so tired. I can take a nap. I really don't want to work anymore. Oh, I wish I could just finish right now. Oh, I'm just so tired. Maybe I shouldn't have had that milkshake, right? But when it comes to kids, again, they go to school and they have all these, just poor food choices, that they're bringing from home or eating or what have you. Then they don't focus, and it's like, oh, so-and-so's got ADD, so-and-so's struggling in school, so-and-so's not good in math. Well, are they not good in math, or are they just having blood sugar fluctuations during that class and they just can't seem to focus? Okay. So some of this could feel like a soapbox, but I think the point I want to get across is sometimes I think when we look at kids, we say their behavior is not very good and that they should, straighten up and be mature and do all the right things. But yet if their blood sugar is all over the place, then it makes it really tough to do that. And so instead of, getting after a kid that they can't function or focus, maybe we should look at like what they're doing, what they're eating. And sometimes as parents or educators or practitioners, what can we do to make things easier for them? So that's kind of my little soapbox. Now, when we look at lab testing, so here's some of the things that I wanted to kind of educate that we can do. Some of the easiest basic baseline testing is fasting glucose. So fasting glucose gives us an idea of where their blood sugar sits after a 12-hour fast. So if you're ever doing these tests as a parent or on yourself, you want to make sure it's about 12-hour fasting. So it kind of gives us a good baseline so that when we retest, then we look at 12-hour fasting on a retest. Now, there's some different values that you'll see in the kind of the traditional lab testing. The ranges are 65 to 100. In the functional medicine space, and a lot of functional medicine practitioners will talk about 85 to 99. Now, I like subscribing to that 85 to 99. A few reasons. One, I think it's great for brain function. I think we have to have proper fuel. Two, I think when you look at anything that's below 85, we start to look at their function. This is why we call it functional medicine. How is their function? When you start getting into like 65, 50, 45, those are medical conditions in which intervention may be necessary. But there's a lot of people that might sit at 70 or 75, and they often say in the office, I go to all these doctors, I tell them all my symptoms, and they say, well, everything looks great. And so that's kind of how they end up in our office is they're like, something is not right. Something is not great. I still have all these symptoms and I can't figure it out. So usually when we see patients that maybe have a glucose of 70 or 75, we'll ask them, Hey, do you feel like you have to eat all the time? Oh, yeah, I feel like I have to eat every hour or I can't function. Do you get jittery, shaky, lightheaded, irritable if you miss meals? Oh, all the time. Like I get really agitated and I start, becoming snappy. Now think about kids becoming irritable and anxious and grumpy and snappy, and fidgety, right? So this it's a much different story. Now it's picking on a kid, it's picking in a classroom, it's being disruptive, right? So fasting to me should be about 85 to 99, and that I think is really good function. Now, when we look at A1C kind of it gives us an idea of how well the person has been doing over the past 6 weeks, right? So a lot of times we look at A1C, it's a percentage. So we look at things like a normal range might be 5.2, or 5.0 to 5.6. So we kind of look at this percentage to say, well, how well has the person been doing over time? And with low blood sugar, we tend to see things like 4.5%, 4.8%, and so that tells us overall the historical values of their glucose and what they're doing has been on the low end. I threw in LDH, and a lot of people don't know what LDH is, and often patients say, "Is that LDL? That's part of cholesterol." And I say, "No, it's not part of LDL." LDH stands for lactic acid dehydrogenase, and what's special about this marker is that it can give us some clues about reactive hypoglycemia. So, meaning that you see those patients or people that their blood sugar is on the low end, and then what they do is they eat something kind of sugary or they have some fruit, and so they kind of raise up and they feel better, and then they crash. And sometimes they crash even further below than where they started. And so in LDH that's on the low end, or one of the values that we look at is below 140, can give us an indicator that there could be some reactive hypoglycemia. So we ask people, hey, do you crave sugar? And if you have sugar, what happens? Or if you have fruit, do you crash afterwards? So people often say, yes, I'm constantly craving sugar. Like I need it because my energy is low, but then I have it and I crash. And so basically these patients are on a roller coaster all day long. And so their mood is on a roller coaster. Their energy is on a roller coaster. Their brain functions on a roller coaster. And when you kind of mention that to patients, they're like, oh, every single day is just unpredictable. I don't know what's going to happen. And so these are clues to us that you have something called dysglycemia, which means abnormal blood sugar. So we kind of, when we look at blood sugar, we're looking at different pieces. We're looking at hypoglycemia, which is low blood sugar. We're looking at dysglycemia, which means abnormal blood sugar. So it means ups and downs, right? And then we have high blood sugar, or we get into like diabetes. Okay. So hypo always means low. Dys means abnormal. And then we have diabetes, which is our high blood sugar state. So I threw on here, there's a couple other blood sugar markers that you'll see practitioners run. And so you can have an antibody, which is type 1 diabetes. So kids do have type 1 diabetes. This is usually juvenile diabetes or diabetes that's in kids. And so we'll run things like insulin antibodies, we'll run islet cell antibodies, and we'll run something called GAD or glutamic acid decarboxylase antibodies. What this gives us an idea is if you have an autoimmune condition that is attacking and altering the function of the pancreas or the pancreatic cells or some of the mechanisms within the pancreas. And when you alter these and you can have these fluctuations in blood sugar. You can sometimes have low blood sugar and you can have high blood sugar. You tend to see that patients with this tend to be more of those type 1 diabetics that you see in kids that need to be on insulin. Another thing that we will run is we'll look at things like C-peptide, which gives us an idea how insulin is doing and kind of where the diabetic aspect is if we're dealing with that in kids. So I kind of wanted to list some of the really simple kind of blood sugar markers. And there's actually a couple more that I want to show you. In showing you, I kind of want to just educate. So this part of our love in this office is educating. This is why you see kind of on our YouTube channel, we have tons of different webinars, that we give you guys to say, here's information, here's things that you can learn, about different topics. So in this, I'm going to kind of talk about next is lipids. So lipids are your cholesterol markers, and a lot of times people think, well, cholesterol marker is cardiovascular. Cholesterol marker is all about eggs, egg yolk, and fat. And there's actually some really cool pieces when you look at lipids and you look at cholesterol. It can actually give us some ideas what's going on with even blood sugar. So triglycerides is kind of that key point in here. Triglycerides can be produced, by the consumption of glucose and some excess glucose. So, for example, you tend to see that people that have diabetes will tend to have high triglycerides. People with low blood sugar will tend to have low triglycerides. Okay. So often we see this in patterns where we look at somebody, we say their fasting glucose is low, their A1C is low, and their triglycerides are low. And so we start to see the patterns emerge on blood chemistry. And then we ask the patient those questions. Do you have fatigue before meals? Do you get tired in between meals? Do you need to take naps all the time? Do you get lightheaded, jittery, shaky, anxious? Is your sleep disrupted and you have to wake up through the night? And if you start matching their symptoms, which is subjective, with the lab testing, which is objective, this is where I think the two worlds come together and say, hey, the symptoms match the test, so we must be on the right track. And then at the very end, we'll try to talk about the why and what do we do about it. But I tell you all this because, a lot of patients, they have blood work. Most of us have portals that we can, go on and we can look at our tests. So, if you kind of like geeking out, or if you're super curious, then go on a portal, pull up your blood work, look at these lab markers and say, hey, do I fall into these ranges? Maybe you might discover that you tend to be low blood sugar and that's why you're struggling with migraines. You might show that, I'm kind of trending on the high blood sugar side and maybe I should work on this because, this is why my weight is kind of higher than I would like. And this is how it is with kids, so some kids, they might be more insulin resistance and they're struggling with their weight and they're a little bit inactive. You might have another kid that's struggling in school and struggling with sleep and having some crazy dreams. Maybe that's some low blood sugar. So I just challenge you, if you guys have portals, anytime you're watching these webinars, open up your portal and look at those labs and kind of see what those patterns look like. That is the beautiful thing about blood chemistry, is you're understanding patterns. Okay. All right, next. So we're talking about these low blood sugar patterns. So let me kind of give you some things to look at. So a lot of times we'll kind of see, you actually look at sodium potassium. It's kind of an interesting piece. A lot of times when we see low blood sugar, we also tend to see low cortisol patterns as well. So sometimes you'll see people that have low blood sugar crave sugar, and people that have low cortisol will crave salt. Now, if you look at marketing again and look at foods that are marketed, what are some of the most commonly marketed foods? They are the salt and sweet, right? We got dark chocolate with sea salt. We have caramel with salt. We have potato chips dipped in chocolate, right? And those sound amazing. But this, sometimes when you see people craving certain things, it gives you a clue of what's going on. So when we look at sodium and potassium, when we tend to see some of your low blood sugar and low cortisol patterns, we can actually sometimes see the sodium levels be a little bit on the low side on your blood work. And then you ask the patient, do you crave salt? And they just smile. They're like, oh my gosh, I love my bag of chips. I love pretzels. I even had a lady that we're actually improving her blood sugar and adrenals. And this week she was telling me how she actually had to throw out a dish because it was so salty to her. And she goes, that means I'm getting better because I'm not salting my food so much. We'll hear about people that have low blood sugar, low cortisol, and it's interesting to watch what they cook, where they're cooking things that have a lot of fruit, but then they have something that's salty with it. And it's just kind of fun. So I just challenge you to kind of like look at yourself, look at your friends, look at your kids. What are they craving? Sometimes that gives you a clue. So we look at sodium, potassium, and we say, sodium might be a little bit low. Glucose is below 85. We look at A1C, and that might be low. We look at LDH below 140. We look at low triglycerides. And then if you do have these tests, sometimes we can look at low cortisol levels. And so these are kind of some of the patterns that will start to emerge when we're looking at lab testing. So with all that, I kind of want to go into different symptoms. And this, I've kind of alluded to this already, but I want to give some thoughts out there because this is what I see in the office, and here's some of the things that we do. So I want to talk about like hypoglycemia in school. You know, again, if you notice a kid, your kid or your student, or even if yourself, I mean, you got people that are, in grad school, they're in college, they're going back to school. If you find that you're struggling, at a 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock class, and then you do better in the afternoon classes, that might be a clue that you're struggling with blood sugar, right? If you have an afternoon class, and or even work, we can use that too. And if it's 2, 3, 4 o'clock in the morning or in the afternoon, and you're starting to feel like you need to take a nap, you're starting to get brain fog, you feel like you're kind of like walking through mud, just trying to get through the rest of the afternoon, that could be another sign that you have low blood sugar. And then finally, sometimes when people do wake up in the morning, if you struggle to wake up in the morning and struggle to get going, this might be, an indicator of some low cortisol levels, low blood sugar levels are kind of playing a role. So you have to kind of get up and go. These people, tend to kind of crave more of the sugary foods in the morning. So you kind of see like the Danishes or coffee with a lot of sugar and cream, or you'll see like those high sugary drinks, that you can get at coffee chains, high sugar cereals that kids will often kind of crave and gravitate towards. So that's kind of what you're going to see with some of these hypoglycemia in schools. Other things that you kind of want to look for is focusing. Do you have a hard time with focus, concentration, remembering what your teacher said? Are you fidgety? Are you, shaking, your leg at the table? Are you disruptive during school? Are you spacing out and kind of daydreaming out the window? Right. So these are some of those low blood sugar symptoms that doesn't mean the kid has ADD or ADHD, but they actually might have some blood sugar instabilities. And again, the roller coaster of blood sugar can affect people all day. So I mean, you look at how long kids go to school. I mean, there's a lot of kids that are on the bus by 7 and they don't get home until 4. That's a long time. And so you look, and I have kids, so there's oftentimes I'm like, ask my daughter, I'm like, what did you take for school today? And she's like, well, I took this and that and the other. I'm like, oh, that's why you're kind of being mean and angry and grumpy and dizzy, and why you have a headache, so you got to get more protein, more fat. And I think all parents have had this conversation with their kid, but it can be really disruptive at school, make it really hard for the learning environment. So, I think it's one thing that, to kind of check in on your kid, but I think it's another thing to educate and say, look, this is the reason. So even with my daughter, we've talked about like we need a good fat and we need good protein, in your food so that you can function better throughout the day. So I don't want you taking a bag of chips and some pretzels and some cookies. That is not going to do anybody good, or your teacher, or probably us when you get home. So let's fix this, right? So there's some really cool things that we can do. I've often gotten in touch with teachers and discussed about maybe a mid-afternoon snack. Some schools don't really like that because they think it could be disruptive. So there's times that we try to say, is there something that we can do that's really simple? I think with one kid, we got those little teeny tiny boxes of raisins, where it wasn't disruptive, but he can like pop a couple, around 10 o'clock. And so we did that even as a trial and error. It's like, does this help? If it helps, then that could be something that we can figure out, like, how do we improve the functionality of that kid? Do they need to go to the nurse's office and have a snack so it's not disruptive to the students, but allows that kid to continue to learn? So there's creative ways. And what I found is teachers are really, really happy to be creative and to think of something to help the kids, because the teachers want life in their teaching environment to be amazing. So anything they can do to help that, I've yet to find a teacher who wasn't willing to help. So school. So these are some of the things we talked about. So difficulty with concentration, anxiety, lack of focus, fatigue, changes in mood. We talked about anxiety and things like that, but you can see the changes where do they get grumpy? Do they get irritable? Do they get mean? These are all things that, some of these mood changes that can really be impacted by blood sugar. And then finally, dizziness and just weakness. So if they're kind of getting a little dizzy or kind of weak, these could be some signs. These are kind of when you get to more serious signs, but nonetheless, they're things that we should look for. So I wanted to talk about hormones because I know with kids, right? Some of the things that you struggle with as parents is those changes in hormones that kind of start from middle school, and then they kind of go through high school. So it's definitely a lot of fun. Sarcastic input. It can be really challenging, and what I've seen a lot with patients, what I've seen with my friends' kids, my kids, is blood sugar definitely plays a role with hormones. We know this as adults, right? So when you look at an adult female, well, and I'm going to give male and female examples, but when you look at an adult female, if their blood sugar is off, um, these are things can really affect and alter our functions in our physiology of hormones. So in women, one of the biggest reasons that you see PCOS or polycystic ovarian syndrome is actually dysglycemia and what they call like an insulin surges. So these are some really big pieces that they look at with ovarian cyst. When you look at cycle disruptions and abnormal circadian rhythms of cycles, or not circadian, but just abnormal rhythms of the menstrual cycle, these can also be disrupted by blood sugar imbalances. So whenever I'm trying to work on, an adult female that has, hormonal imbalances or PCOS, these are some of the foundational things that we start working on right away. Now, fast forward into like a female, a teenager, or a middle school female. I hear this all the time, and I heard this growing up, and I hear it more as a doctor. But if you ask, like, "Hey, when did all these issues start?" Well, it started when I was in high school. I started on birth control when I was in high school because my hormones were abnormal. And then you dig in, you say, "Well, what was high school like?" And kind of the joke, and it seems to be pretty true most of the time, but the joke seems to be that most of them will say, "Well, I had a Dr. Pepper and cookies, or I had a Dr. Pepper and a Snickers bar, or I had a Coke and Cheetos, or I had flaming hot Cheetos and a Dr. Pepper." And you're like, that is nowhere healthy, right? But you kind of start tracing it back, and you start seeing like you have this seems like more often the female population, in high school that is eating, you know, kind of sugar and junk food as their lunch. And then their hormones are really bad. They're really painful. They're all over the place, and they get put on birth control to regulate, right? So this is kind of what we see very often, which that can also be disrupted too. But this is where blood sugar issues in kids come into play. Now, on the male side, so we talk about adult males. So remember, I wanted to keep saying like you can apply this toward yourself as an adult. But if you look at it, males, adult males and blood sugar, one of the biggest things that it does to us is it actually can alter our testosterone levels and make it overconvert into estrogen, and called DHT. And so if we look at those hormone imbalances in guys, what it can lead to is things like weight gain. It can lead to depression. It can lead to irritability and anger and a lack of focus and concentration. So now you take this and let's apply it to a kid that's in high school or middle school. Does this also impact their weight? Does it impact their muscle stamina? Does it impact their mood or their ability to manage or anger management, manage stress? So some of those things that you see in older men, or middle-aged men that have hormonal imbalances, we can see that in kids. It just comes out sometimes in, picking on somebody or being kind of a bully, or being sarcastic or being mean, or getting angry really easily. So I want everybody, and I was kind of hoping that you can almost stop and think like, how does blood sugar dysregulation impact hormones? A lot. And I think it gets overlooked because I think in the female population, I think it's put everybody on birth control and try to regulate their cycles. I think on the male, it's just, oh, they're just a boy and they're just boys are boys, right? And I think it gets overlooked. So that's what I want to bring to the table tonight is that, hey, this can also impact hormonal development, body development, brain development, all these different pieces I think play a role. Okay. So I just wanted to kind of point some of those pieces out. So these are things I was talking about: your abnormal cycles, painful cycles, abnormal weight gain, and then PCOS. And then finally, before I go into what to do, I think also if you look at kids, some of the other pieces that we look at is sports. You know, yeah, how well are they doing at sports? Do they get headaches after playing a sport? How's their energy? There's different things. How fast do they recover? Um, I can't stress enough, and this is why it's kind of a good seminar. Is I think blood sugar is severely overlooked because I think we either talk about diabetes or we talk about very, very low blood sugar. But there's a lot of people in the middle who are not getting help, that have all the symptoms and they don't know where to go. And so that's what I want to bring to the table is all these people in the middle that are kind of left behind and overlooked, but it could be something as simple as blood sugar regulation. So what do we do? Well, obviously, the first thing we got to do is we got to work on diet, right? Don't skip meals. There's so many people that skip meals. Look at your kid. What are they eating and what are they not eating? Are they skipping meals? Do not skip meals, especially if you're a growing kid. You got to have calories. You're burning calories to grow and to develop. So decreasing your caloric intake and decreasing some of these healthy fats is just not the way to go. So start off with a good breakfast, right? And not cereal with milk, right? That's not protein. That is not healthy fat. That is not good veggies that give you amino acids. It is, milk and cereal. And obviously you don't see a lot of kids that are saying, ooh, I want to eat something that's like oats and bran and healthy. They're like, I want this with sugar and this with dye, right? And that's not a good way to start the day. So, we always try to do things in my household. Eggs I think is a great protein and healthy fat. I know not all kids like it, but there are things that we can try to do. There's chicken maple sausage, which is awesome. Turkey bacon, regular bacon. There's eggs. You can, kids like a smoothie. You can do a smoothie with avocados. They probably won't even taste it because avocados are great in smoothies. You can be creative, and I think that's the hardest part with most parents that I talk to is I don't know what to do. And actually I was working with a mom on her with her kid, and I tell you what, I actually I saw her kid today, and it was just a highlight of my day because he was doing so much better. His mood was much better. He wasn't negative, and honest to goodness, I give a lot of credit to mom. I think mom has done a great job. I've seen what she's done a little bit on social media where she's actually asked people like, what do I do? Do you have ideas? I need some help with breakfast. I need some help with like gluten-free and dyes, and the community's reached out and helped her. And so as we were talking today, she's like, yeah, food is definitely much easier. We found foods that he likes and his mood is better. His energy is better. His school is better. And it's hard. I'm not even going to say it's easy. It's hard, but it gets easier. And there's a community of people that will definitely help out there if you utilize social media or Nextdoor, or some of these, Pinterest. Actually, the mom today was saying how she found a lot of great ideas on Pinterest. And I was like, I didn't even think about that. So start off, we got to make sure that there's healthy fat and protein for breakfast, for lunch, and for dinner. Right? Healthy fat and protein for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. And you say, well, what is that? Well, proteins, again, we can do chicken maple sausage, we can do turkey bacon, we can do eggs. We can find some proteins like that. It doesn't always have to be breakfast for breakfast. You can come up with other ideas. Healthy fats could be coconut oil. Again, your chicken maple sausage could be, a good fat to kind of get started. Avocados are good. Even if you had to do a protein shake, if you did a protein shake and use like pea protein, in there to kind of be the base of your shake, and then you threw some, some veggies and an apple or something like that, that actually tastes good. That's a great way to get started. Eat clean and reduce your inflammatory foods. So our goal for the day is to keep our blood sugar stable. So as we're coming through, we're keeping it stable, right? We don't want roller coasters. That's not good for our brain. It's not good for our body. And so when you eat healthy fats and proteins, it helps to stabilize. So does fiber. So foods that have more fiber, it's better than foods that don't. Foods, and they taste better. Like watermelon is great, but it has a lot of sugar. It's not very much fiber. So we want to keep our fiber, our fat, and our protein for meals or for snacks. Nuts and seeds, that's a good fat and a good protein. So what if you did a trail mix, that was really tasty and yummy? There's things. So it's a struggle. I'm not going to sugarcoat it, but I think once you get there, you see the difference. And when you feel better as a person or your kid is doing better, it actually makes the changes well worth it. And almost any parent is willing to do the change when they see the outcomes. Get your teacher involved. A lot of times teachers actually might have some other good ideas. Teachers are great resources, and they're also willing to help. Other things, work on stress. So don't forget, stress plays a role with blood sugar. I think that gets overlooked often. So, school is stressful. Middle school is really hard. I have a son and a daughter, and I kind of watch my daughter's side with friends, and yeah, that can be really tough too. School is stressful, so you got some kids who are in honors and AP everything, and that's a lot of stress. So kind of watch out for that. I think that's an important piece to look at. We were talking to a friend yesterday, and and she was talking about how she gave her kids a mental health day just to give them a break. So things like that are totally needed and appropriate. For kids that are going through a lot of things at school. Physical exercise. Sometimes you got to watch it when they're hypoglycemic. You got to watch their physical exercise and make sure they don't go further into hypoglycemia. So if you do exercise, you got to make sure that you're eating appropriately for that. But physical exercise is really good when it comes to cortisol, energy, utilizing sugar, brain function, and what have you. So physical exercise is great. Supplements. I'm a fan of supplements. I think there's a time and a place for supplements. I don't think the time is to make everybody and their pets taking a handful of supplements with every meal. That's not the goal in life, but supplemental support can be good. And so we'll use supplements to help support low blood sugar and to support low cortisol until their body is back on track, and then we'll pull them off so that they can maintain on their own. So supplemental support can be really, really useful. And then cortisol, make sure you're watching stress and cortisol levels. So if you know somebody in the functional medicine world that does measure cortisol, this could be a really important piece, because you might have somebody that has low cortisol, so they're really struggling to maintain some of the blood sugar stability. And then finally, sleep. Sleep we all know it's important. There's so many studies on this, how kids function, their cortisol levels, etc. So make sure your kids are getting plenty of sleep. There was even a fascinating study on it's like kids who get A's versus B's versus C's and the amount of sleep that they get every night. It was really kind of fascinating. There's just really cool studies out there on sleep. So it's definitely very important. And then that's kind of wrapping up things. I talked a little bit more about this on the radio show that I did, yesterday. So we do it every Monday. So, on the radio, you can always listen. So I spoke for a half hour yesterday on blood sugar and bantered back and forth with Scott Watley, who's the host. So, if you love this stuff, just, listen to us on the radio. So every Monday we're rotating through and talk about different topics, and then you can, listen to the webinar and ask more questions, and then you can go to YouTube and listen to the webinar all over again. So it's here for you. The education is here for you guys to help you out as much as possible. There's a lot of things that we can do. So it's just a way of trying to reach more people, as best as we can. So, myself and Dr. Maynard, he's also a chiropractic neurologist, and then Jacob Meyer is our counselor, super amazing counselor. And then also Dr. Trinka does a lot of our eyes and vision, and a lot of the rehab on that end of it. We also have a nurse practitioner in the office. So we have a lot of great resources if you ever need it. But I hope you kind of enjoy this webinar. I think it's really simple, concept, but with a lot of consequences. So if you ever want to do a consultation, we offer free consultations, 30-minute consultations for all our new patients. The purpose of the consultation is to see if it's a good fit to work together. It's not an exam. It's just basically a meet and greet. So I find this important because, if it's a good fit, we'll move forward. And if not, then we can find somebody or somewhere that maybe is. So we just want to make sure that you guys are being helped as best as possible. So we offer telehealth if needed. And again, you can always call for a free consultation. So our number's on the screen. You can also go to Integrated Health System or integratedhealthdenver.com, integratedbraincenters.com. And you can also, reach us that way. We're also on Facebook and Instagram and all the great social media platforms. So we also have a blog on our website, so you can read our blogs about this topic. You can follow us on social media and grab all the information that we're kicking out to you guys. So there's a lot of information that's coming out of our office to support you all. So take advantage of it. And if we can be of any help, that'd be phenomenal. So I think that's about it for our webinar this evening. Next on the docket will be probably Dr. Maynard. So, make sure you listen to, his webinar or YouTube channel. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch all the different videos on different topics. And make sure to tune in Monday, listen to our radio show. So I hope you guys have a great evening and be safe and be healthy.